The Chicago Bulls take the court in their final preseason game of this preseason period, with the regular season starting for the Bulls on Wednesday. What do I want to see from the team in their final preseason game? I'm going to talk a little bit about that today, as well as talk about some more trade rumors now popping up with Zach LaVine, and what is the biggest question for the team heading into now the regular season after seeing the team in the preseason. We're going to talk about all that and more right after this.
You are now tuned in to Chicago Bulls Central, your number one place for all Chicago Bulls news and content.
What's going on, Bulls fans? Welcome to another episode of Chicago Bulls Central, your number one spot for everything Chicago Bulls related. I'm the host there, Haize, but more importantly, you guys can follow the channel at Bulls Central Pod on every social media platform we happen to be on. With that being said, let's go ahead and get into this content for today, y'all. I want to start it off with this, man. The Bulls have their final preseason game today against the Cleveland Cavaliers. And what to look for in this game? Now, I want to be clear here. This game can go a lot of different ways. We can see the Bulls, after making their roster cuts, try to take a look at what their roster looks like their actual rotation. We can see the starters basically sit, right? Maybe they play a handful of minutes, 10 minutes, and then we see mainly, the young players again and some of the G League and two-way contract players. But overall, this is about what I would like to see, right? And so I just want to throw out that caveat that while this is what I want to see, I do recognize that depending on how the coaching staff decides to attack this final preseason game, we just very well may not see that, right? But now with Lonzo Ball being back, right, and he's playing in this game, with everybody being healthy, right? Yes, we had the game where it was mainly the starter set and then mainly the bench set in the previous game. I would really love to see the first half of this game be the Chicago Bulls running their actual 8 to 9 man rotation. That's what I like, between the different combination of players that you want out there, the different looks you want to throw. I would really love to see basically be a dry run of exactly what we're going to see in the regular season. And so that's just my personal desire, right? Like to see that starting five, which I really think last game was the best game we've seen yet from that starting five operating as a unit, right? And then even then you still had cold shooting days from like Josh Giddey. Patrick Williams wasn't really as aggressive in the second half as he was in the first half. But I would really love to see another game of this starting lineup to just see how they are. And then I would love to see how Ayo Dosunmu, Jalen Smith, and then whether it's Modest, Julian Phillips, Torrey Craig, whoever that eighth guy is, right? I would love to see that mainly be the rotation we see in at least the first half of this game. And throw in Lonzo Ball in there as well as the ninth guy. And then, you have another guy as the 10th guy. Now, I don't expect you to see all those guys for a lot of minutes. That's why I say like the first half. You got those first 24 minutes of this game. I would really love to see the combinations that we're going to see of the main combinations, I should say, that we're going to see during the regular season. And that doesn't mean it's not going to be tinkered with and things during the regular season. It is. But I would like to think at this point, Billy Donovan kind of knows who his 8 and 9 guys are. And while I know this team is shaping up to be deep, and a lot of Bulls fans are hoping that we're going to see a consistent 10, 11-man rotation, it's just not realistic, right? So there is going to be somebody left off. And while THT has had a really great preseason, you got to look at it like this, right? We know the starting five. And then when Lonzo's going to play, he's going to play. So whenever, however that minutes plan that they have him on and lack of back-to-backs and whatever, some scheduled rest, when he's going to play. So that's 6 players right there. Ayo's going to be the first player off the bench. Jalen Smith is definitely going to play as the only other big right there. So that gets you to 8 guys right there. And then so you have Torrey Craig as a veteran, and we know Billy Donovan loves his veterans. You have Julian Phillips, a guy, right, as well that, has played the best of preseason. He led the team in minutes until he went down with that injury, and they let him sit. So, and Dalen Terry has also shown some steps up. And Modest Bucilis, right? I didn't even mention Modest Bucilis. So right there, you have guys that are going to play. And so that leaves guys like a THT who, while he's had a great preseason, I've said it before, I think he's going to be a guy that's used like a Derrick Jones Jr., that we may see for 2-3 games, especially if we need, that defense, and he's playing better than Modest Bucilis. And, Modest and being a rookie, maybe he has some shortcomings or whatever else. But we may not see a whole lot of THT even with the preseason that he's had, unless he does pass a guy like Torrey Craig. And we'll see. Torrey Craig didn't play a lot in preseason, but I think that's more so because of his veteran status. And he does, exactly what Torrey Craig can bring when he's on the court, right? We kind of all know what that is. So it's going to be interesting. So I would really love to see how that rotation is going to shake out and really use this last preseason game to kind of as that last test run, that last dry run for your actual rotation, right? And so would love to see that. Love to see Lonzo out there with some of Modest and Julian as well, and with the way that he can just make the game easier on them. So that's really what I'm looking for. And as well, like the defense for this team, I got to admit, right? It hasn't been great, and it's had its periods where it's looked god-awful. I want to be clear there. But it's looked better than what I was expecting. And that may not maintain to the season, right? But the defense has been, like I said, if they can be average or right before, if they can avoid being in the bottom tier, right? If they can hover around 16th to 18th defensively with the way that this offense looks like it can shape up, I think that this could be a team that really does punch above its weight and maybe maybe competes in a lot more games than what I initially expected. I still don't have this team as of right now winning a bunch of games this season, but we'll see. We'll see. And then outside of that, right, what I would also love to see in this game, kind of with individual players, Kobe, can he continue to be efficient with less shots, right? And, that evolution of him with Josh Giddey and with Lonzo Ball for that matter, because he's going to be playing off the ball. Either one of those guys are in there to kind of continue to see the X's and O's part, right? The movement without the ball. We saw this team probably the most in the 3 years I've had this show move without the ball. That happened in the last preseason game, right? So stylistically, I want to see if that maintains. And then how Nikola Vucevic and Zach LaVine were locked in defensively the last game as well. Like, of course, they still have their limitations defensively because they're just not great on-ball defenders, but they really looked way more engaged defensively, and how that really helped get out there on that offensive side of the ball as well, get that offense out. So it's a lot of kind of interesting things to look for from a basketball standpoint. And I think even if the starters end up not playing a lot of minutes in this next game, there still leaves a lot that you can really try to look for and take out of this game. Like, does Patrick Williams follow up his most aggressive performance with being aggressive and attentive again, right? If Modest does play, like, how does Modest look? Is the rookie that we all kind of are really excited for and see. And while I've seen some you know what? Listen, I know I end the show talking about Zach LaVine trades. Bulls fans that try to, stop trying to get too smart. People that now say, well, will the Bulls look to trade Kobe instead of Zach? Come on. Anyway, I may cover that on tomorrow's mailbag because some of y'all have been tripping. But that, and then to see, this may be the last chance for us to see some of the back end of the bench guys, right? We're not going to see a whole lot of Chris Duarte during the season. We're not going to see a whole lot of Javon Carter during the season. We may not see a whole lot of Adama Sanogo, even though I think we should during the season. We may not see a whole lot of that, right? So really still looking forward to seeing those guys. Hopefully that they maybe can make it an impression in this last game. Not for the ball-headed hoe, and really not for Chris Duarte either. The only back end of the bench player I'm hoping to really make a lasting impression is Adama Sanogo, if I'm just being 100% honest. I hope that he can make an impression to kind of wake up Billy Donovan to kind of realize that Adama Sanogo, he's above the G League at this point. I just don't know what in his development process really comes other than him at least getting minutes down in the G League. But it's just so much more that's left there for him than just being in the G League. But, that's this coaching staff, when it comes up to it. And, you just got to hope that the Bulls, with having Adama on this two-way contract, that whenever he does come off of it, that another team doesn't throw some money at Adama because, listen, the Bulls, once again, just letting a talent that, I'm not saying that he has starter-level talent or anything like that, but Adama Sanogo has shown you he can bang, all right, with the bigs in this league, and he can at least be a guy that if you get him 16 minutes, he's probably going to get you close to a double-double in production, and he knows and understands his limitations, so he doesn't try to do too much outside of his game. He really plays to his strengths, and so it really sucks like that in the case. Don't get me wrong, I love Jalen Smith, and I like what he could bring and mean to this team for sure, right? So I don't want to act like I still like Jalen Smith and what his permanent production has been, but it's just it came by the behest of now we don't get to see more of Adama, right? So that is what it is when it comes down to it. But overall, still a lot of things I'm really looking forward to seeing from this Bulls team heading into this last preseason game. And the most important thing, though, is make sure you come out of that last preseason game still healthy, right? That's the thing. Stay healthy. Still be healthy. Be healthy. That's the thing. Do not risk anything in this last preseason game. I don't care if somebody slightly slips on the floor. Sit their ass down, right? So, that's the health is the most important thing. But with that, right, that brings us to, I had a different set of questions for this Bulls team heading into preseason. I asked in the start of preseason, what are the biggest questions heading into preseason? Well, now, what are the biggest questions heading into the season for the Bulls? Some of the questions have been eliminated to a degree, right? To as much of a degree as they can be, during a preseason period. And one of those big questions that I had coming into preseason was, have Jalen Smith and Dalen Terry taken a step or a leap? And it looks like they've both taken a step. Now, how big that step is will be determined by how well they play in the regular season. Seems like Julian Phillips may have taken quite a large step from his rookie year to his second year, and I hope that leads him with getting minutes. But it's not a really those type of individual questions have been answered. The dynamic between Kobe and Josh Giddey, I still have some questions on the on ball, off ball, and how is Giddey going to be effective when Kobe has the ball in his hands? Kind of Kobe being effective when Giddey has the ball in his hands has been eliminated. But, Josh Giddey still has to become I'm glad that he's willing to take 3-point shots. That's a big thing. But he has to be better shooting. He hasn't shot the ball well over this preseason period at all. And I just want to see better production from him when it comes down to that, like shooting the ball. But he's been passing really well, rebounding really well. All those things that we've seen of Josh Giddey impacting the game of basketball have still been there. But he has to shoot. You have to shoot better because you're not always going to have the ball in your hands. And even now with seeing some Lonzo and Giddey minutes out there, he's going to be off ball. Josh Giddey got to step that part of his game up a little bit more. But the bigger question I had on how Kobe and Giddey would kind of fit, the Kobe side of that's been answered. The LaVine side of that's been answered as well. Like, LaVine seems like he's ready to embrace this complementary role. And that doesn't mean he's a complementary player, but he's complementing his skill set and maximizing certain parts of his skill set based off what the lineup that he's out there with. And that looks really good, right? The question on Modest Bucilis, how does he look coming out of Summer League? He's a lot of his strengths are still there. Some of the weaknesses as far as on-ball defense have gotten a little bit better because he just doesn't back down. So that's really good. The rotation is kind of crystallized as well. So the bigger questions that I have for this team now, coming out of the preseason and heading into the regular season is, will it work? And that goes to a lot of things, right? I know that's one question, but it applies to a lot of different things. Will this new offensive system work? And will they stick to it when they start facing some adversity? That's the thing, right? How much will it continue to look like it did, for example, in the last preseason game where you had Vooch moving, where you had Patrick Williams being aggressive, right? There was really never any question on if Zach was going to fit into this new system, but the Vooch dynamic, right? Vooch looks a little bit more engaged than what I thought he would, especially considering in media day he seemed like he was kind of over it, right? So those things exist as well there. So, but will it work? That's one of the bigger questions that I have here for this team, and that's the defense. Will the defense be able to be good enough to where it's helping put this offense in better positions, right? And will we be good enough defensively to not completely shoot what this offense does well in its face, right? And then still, will the rotations work, right? Will the dynamic of having a smaller team naturally, will that work as well, right? Because we do have a smaller team. We're going to run smaller rotations. Jalen Smith is going to play a lot of minutes, I think, on this team. But outside of that, and I guess, are we, right? Because you got to look at it. At power forward, it's either going to be Patrick Williams, Torrey Craig, Julian Phillips, or Modest Bucilis most of the time. And while Modest, needs to put on some weight for sure, he has the size and the length. So, this Bulls team, I've seen people say, we need more power forwards. And it's really, our power forward rotation is probably the deepest that it's been. We still don't have a solid center rotation. One injury to either Jalen Smith or Nikola Vucevic completely throws that off to where now we're going to play a decent amount of small ball, unless they do call Adama up and trust him. But overall, just will this work? Will the balance work? Will the offensive flow that we've seen as far as kind of spreading the offense out to where everybody's getting 10 to 15 shots, right? 8 to 15 shots, because I still think there's going to be somebody who ends up getting not a lot of shots in some of those games. But we may see throughout this first part of the season to where in that starting lineup, at least, maybe nobody consistently gets 20 shots per game, right? Maybe you are spreading that out throughout everybody, and that's how you're really kind of keeping defenses on their heels and things like that. So will it work, right? Will the bench rotation work? With having Ayo, having Torrey Craig, having Modest Bucilis, having Julian Phillips, having Dalen Terry, having Jalen Smith, right? And then the Lonzo games that he's in there. Keep in mind, I didn't mention THT in there, and that's 6 people coming off the bench. So, how will you balance that, right? Will that balance of that rotation work? And how will Billy Donovan balance what personnel is out there with in certain situations and areas? And still, because of the nature of having players that were injured and not playing in certain games, we still don't know who the stagger guy is. And that's an important part of this. Which one of the starters is going to stagger some of their minutes with this bench unit? And I think that's even more important, especially in games where Lonzo doesn't play, right? So it could be Giddey if you need some more facilitating. If Julian Phillips and Io are turned into these really good scorers, which they look like in preseason, is it going to be Zach LaVine to kind of get him more opportunities to kind of do some isolation things? Will it be Kobe with Kobe's ability to score in isolation as well and be a distributor? Like, there's always going to be one guy that staggers their minutes a little bit. And I don't think a whole lot, but staggers those minutes somewhat with that bench unit. And so who's going to be that guy, right? And then will that work? So overall, it's just still a lot of questions on how successful this Bulls team is going to be and the things that they're trying to do once the regular season is on and you're playing against some of the better teams and better lineups in the NBA, and especially with how the start of the season is going for the Chicago Bulls, where they have a gauntlet to start the season off with that first month and a half of the season. Like, the Bulls are starting off with a very tough schedule. And so I've said it before that we're really going to kind of know who this team is and how well they stack up with the other teams around them, A, if they stay healthy, and B, with how they compete in this first month. We start off with New Orleans, Milwaukee, OKC, Memphis, Orlando, right? We do have a game against Brooklyn, but then we go to Utah, which has been a tough matchup for us. Dallas, Minnesota, Atlanta, Cleveland, New York, Cleveland, Houston, Detroit. Yeah, but Detroit gave us some work last year, right? And so Milwaukee, Atlanta, Memphis, that takes us to basically the end of November. There are a lot of tough games in there from all teams, a lot of teams that are perceived to be playoff teams this upcoming year. So we'll really kind of know, and definitely through December, because then we got two matchups with Boston in December, one with Milwaukee, another one with Indiana, another matchup with Charlotte in there as well. So, you know, it's going to be interesting. And so will it work? And then another question that I have, and I know I said one question, but another question that I have as well is, like, if you guys saw it, the odds makers for whatever that's worth, Billy Donovan has the highest odds of any coach right now to be fired this season. And the question that I want to have, and I want to turn this, I'm not really worried about the odds and the betting sites and all that. I don't bet. You guys have fun with that. But kind of the more important thing that I want to take away from that is that if this thing does not work, how much of the blame or how much of the accountability will the front office put on Billy Donovan? This has been a front office that throughout times could have put a lot more blame with certain things on Billy D. And they've more so put it on the roster, right? And AK's kind of taking that some on himself as well. But it hasn't really ever been a situation in which Billy Donovan's job security was ever really in question from the Bulls, right? From fans, yeah, some fans would have liked to see him moved on and things like that. But so is this, like, if this thing does not work, and I think that will go to show how much the front office believes in the roster. Because if this thing does not work this season and they crash and burn, was it by design? Was it because they really didn't think this was a roster that could compete for the playoffs and they're cool with the top 10 pick? Or if with new pieces with Josh Giddey and those guys, if this thing just does not look good and it looks like a shit show, will Billy Donovan be held more accountable for that than what he has in the previous years? I'm not saying that he should or not. I don't know, right? But I think when you bring in two veteran assistant coaches that have clearly put their imprint on this team already as well, you can't deny that. Like, when you look at some of the things that have changed with how we're using certain players that have been on this roster, I got to think that comes from a new set of eyes being on this roster as well, and that have added their input. And I give credit for Billy Donovan if he's done that. He's turned the defense over to Wes Unseld Jr. The guys have already talked about Dan Craig. Kobe's talked about it, and their, how much they've paid into their development already. So those are good things. I like that Billy Donovan is trusting his new veteran assistants, but how much will Billy Donovan really be held accountable, right? And then how much of the future of this roster starts taking shape, right? Does Modest look like the guy that we think that he can? Does he start showing glimpses of that? He's not going to look like that incomplete in this first season, but how many glimpses of that do we see? Does Julian Phillips and this growth that we've seen so far in preseason maintain during the regular season to where we look at it and say, we got a steal in Julian Phillips, right? Those are the type of questions that are here now, and those are going to be answered over the course of the season. And I can't wait to see them because, listen, I'm excited about Bulls basketball. But before we go, one of the bigger questions that a lot of people still have on this roster are, what's the future with Zach LaVine? And so recently it has popped. Zach LaVine, two old candidates that we've heard about for Zach before have kind of popped back up into the conversation. And that's the Los Angeles Lakers and the Sacramento Kings. This one coming out yesterday is that the Los Angeles Lakers and Rob Pelinka are still focused on potentially getting a player like Zach LaVine, and that they're always open to making a deal. And with Zach LaVine, solid play, right? I think that's the thing that's overall in this. And that's going to be a question that the Bulls have to ask themselves as well, is this. If the fact that Zach LaVine looks so far like he's going to fit in well, of course, that's going to have teams that want him to fit in with AD, want him to fit in with LeBron, or the King side, wanting him to fit in with Sabonis and Fox, and they have DeMar there, surprisingly enough. So, like, are you going to do that, right? But these are teams that were rumored to be interested before, and even came out yesterday as well that they confirmed that Chicago and the Lakers held extensive trade talks last year and briefly over the summer, and that the talks were almost assured that a pick would be going back for Zach LaVine in a case like that. So, with Zach LaVine looking healthy, with him looking like, hey, he's now a player that is taking a willing role to fit in and to do what's needed, will those trade conversations really pop back up at the trade deadline this year? And I get it. Some Bulls fans are going to say, well, why are we looking to move Zach if he's fitting in? And you're right to have that question, right? And that's where that's where the Bulls' direction is really going to be told. Because I think if Zach LaVine is fitting in and this team is winning games, right? And they're winning games because of the totality of the roster and how well this roster is fitting in together. If they move Zach LaVine, that may signify, despite everything that they said, that maybe they are kind of more focused and have a bigger desire to keep that pick. Now, if the team isn't winning games, let's say they're still on pace to win 30, 35 games, and they move Zach LaVine at the trade deadline, and they have that type of pace of a 35-win pace, to me, that just says that, hey, we don't want to hover around a play-in again. We're going to go ahead and trade Zach. Yes, we're going to be worse for the rest of the season, but we're maximizing our chance to keep the pick. So those things are playing into it as well, and it really comes down to how this Bulls front office, what direction they truly want to go. And I don't even know if they really know right now, right? They may not know right now which way they truly want to go. They may have some ideas, but they may not. They may really do want to see what this roster turns into and develops before they make that harsh decision. And so, while the moving of Zach LaVine or the shopping of Zach LaVine is a hot button topic with Bulls, the Kings and the Lakers are both teams that would make sense in a case like that. They have the salary cap filler. The contracts that can fill it in, right? With the Kings, they still have $4 million below the first tax apron, so they can absorb a little bit more than they send out, which could be beneficial for the Bulls as well. The Kings did make a move that opens up some of their roster and money as well there. So all those things are there. So it really comes down to what we see. And if Zach LaVine looks like the Zach that we've seen throughout some of this preseason so far, I can see more teams being in on Zach. The question is, are the Bulls then willing, or have they seen enough to maybe where they're willing for Zach to be here long term? And that's the question that we don't have the answer to. We can speculate as fans and say what we think this team should do, but as we've seen before, AK doesn't really view it the way that we view. And that's happened throughout most of his time in running this Bulls team. So we'll see where that goes. We'll see what that turns into, guys. But guys, thank you so much. Make sure you guys are following the show at Bulls Central Pod. You can send us any feedback, questions, comments, concerns, bullscentralpod@gmail.com. Lastly, if you want to leave a text message and our voicemail for the mailbag, which goes down every Saturday and Sunday, the number to do so, 773-270-2799. We are the number one spot for everything Chicago Bulls related, but that's thanks to you guys. And like I like to end every episode on, go Bulls. Love you guys. See you right if you can, y'all. Peace.
This has been a presentation of the Break Media.